Excuse me, Ava. What exactly are you hiding in that bag? Ms. Whitmore's voice cut through the classroom like a blade. The room froze. A few pencils stopped scratching. One student coughed awkwardly, but no one said a word. Ava Johnson, 12 years old, eyes wide and hands trembling slightly, looked up from her seat in the back corner. She had just opened the flap of her deep burgundy Telfar backpack. Its leather still smooth and too pristine, too expensive, too unfamiliar for this part of Denver. The label practically glowed under the fluorescent lights. I was just getting my notebook, Ava said, her voice barely above a whisper. Oh. Ms. Whitmore took a few firm steps toward her, her heels tapping sharply across the linoleum floor. Then you won't mind if I take a look. Ava instinctively pulled the bag closer to her chest. I'd rather, she began, but it was too late. Ms. Whitmore snatched the bag from Ava's arms in one swift, practiced movement. The room let out a collective gasp. Phones slipped out of backpacks and onto laps, tilted just slightly. The camera lenses began to glow, recording silently. Let's see what's so important that you need a luxury purse to bring it to middle school, Ms. Whitmore said, unzipping the main compartment with theatrical emphasis. Please don't. Those papers are... Ava's voice cracked. Her cheeks were flushed now, eyes darting toward her classmates, whose faces were stunned, amused, confused. Ms. Whitmore ignored her completely. A red folder, monogrammed in gold with the initials J.H., came out first. She held it up like evidence. Johnson Holdings, she said flatly, as though the name itself was suspicious. Is this your homework, Ava? Or is it your father's corporate secrets? Giggles. Snickers. The sharp intake of breath from a girl in the front row. Ava's hands were now clasped in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. They're just papers from my dad's office. He said I could. Ava tried again, swallowing hard. Oh, he said? And how old is your father that he thinks it's appropriate for a middle schooler to carry confidential documents around like she's what? A secretary? Or maybe a courier? More laughter. Ava blinked rapidly, her vision blurring. They were in the bag because I was at his office this morning. I didn't. You didn't think to leave this at home? Ms. Whitmore snapped, now pulling out a sleek black tablet, a sealed invitation with gold lettering, and a small, leather-bound notebook. What is this? A corporate VIP badge? Are you planning to sneak into a board meeting after lunch? Some students were laughing nervously now. Others looked uneasy, their eyes shifting between the teacher and the girl at the back of the room. Ms. Whitmore, said Malik, a boy seated 2 rows ahead of Ava. I don't think she did anything wrong. Malik, you can stay quiet unless you'd like me to inspect your belongings as well, Ms. Whitmore said, sharp and cold. He sat back immediately. Ava looked like she was shrinking into her seat, her shoulders hunched, her lips pressed into a tight line. You didn't have to touch my bag, she said finally, her voice small but firm. It's private. You should have asked. Ms. Whitmore turned toward her, lifting her chin. When you act suspiciously, Ava, it becomes necessary to investigate. We take security seriously at Lincoln Ridge, even if your family thinks the rules don't apply. And that's when something shifted. The word family landed like a trap door opening beneath Ava. Several students exchanged looks. What do you mean by that? Asked Lucia, a girl who usually didn't speak up. Her voice was flat. Ms. Whitmore hesitated for half a second. Then, I mean that students who come in with designer accessories and sealed corporate documents should be subject to the same rules as everyone else, especially if they think they're above them. She never said she was above anything, Malik muttered. By now, 3 different phones were recording. Ms. Whitmore noticed. She froze just briefly, then smoothed her skirt and placed the items on Ava's desk one by one, as though she were doing her a favor. There, she said. Next time, think twice before bringing unnecessary items to school. You're dismissed from class until further notice. I'll be notifying the principal. But I didn't... Ava tried protest. You may go, Ms. Whitmore said, her voice loud and final. Ava stood up, gathered her things slowly, now scattered and disorganized, and slipped the Telfar bag over her shoulder. Her face was still burning, and though she held back her tears, everyone could see her pain. She walked out in silence. As soon as the door clicked shut, the room exploded into whispers. Yo, that was messed up. Did you see her face? Why'd she go after Ava like that? Was that a real Johnson Holdings pass? Back in the hallway, Ava leaned against the cold beige wall and finally let herself cry. That morning had started like any other. Her dad's driver had picked her up a little earlier than usual, so she could stop by his office before school. She loved those brief moments in his skyscraper office. Huge windows overlooking downtown Denver, fresh croissants, polished surfaces that smelled like cedar and citrus. He had handed her the folder absent-mindedly. Can you hold on to this for me? I need to send it with the driver after he drops you off. Don't open it, okay? Okay. He had kissed her forehead distractedly before rushing off to a meeting. Ava had tucked the folder into her brand-new backpack, a birthday gift from her mom. You deserve nice things, her mother had said, brushing a hand through Ava's curls. Now, that same bag felt like a curse, a target on her back. She didn't know, standing there with her cheeks still wet, that across the city, on the 42nd floor of the Johnson Holdings Tower, Marcus D. Johnson had just received a video link from one of his assistants. He clicked it open and watched in silence as Ms. Whitmore pulled his daughter's belongings out in front of 30 other students. At first, his face didn't move. He just stared. But as the video continued, something in his jaw clenched. A stillness overtook him, a familiar, cold stillness. Because this wasn't the first time he had seen that woman humiliate a black child in that school. And 30 years ago, that black child had been him. The air inside Lincoln Ridge Middle School shifted the moment the black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the front lot. No one had to be told who it was. The secretary at the front desk stood up before he even reached the door. The principal's assistant dropped her coffee. And Ms. Whitmore, standing near the faculty lounge, felt a cold knot twist in her stomach. She knew before anyone said his name. Marcus D. Johnson stepped to the school's main entrance like a thunderstorm in a suit, tall, composed, polished, and absolutely unreadable. His presence filled the space without effort. Behind him, 2 assistants and a private security detail walked briskly, quiet and efficient. He did not speak as he approached the front desk. He didn't have to. Mr. Johnson, Principal Grant will see you right away, the secretary stammered. She's in the conference room. He gave a small nod, not even looking at her, and continued down the hallway. At the same moment, a group of students huddled near their lockers, whispering and checking their phones. The video had already hit the local social media circuit, and though none of them dared say it out loud, there was a silent, collective thrill that something big was about to happen. Marcus's steps echoed as he approached the classroom wing. Ms. Whitmore, standing near the corner, tried to straighten her blouse and gather what remained of her composure. But when he turned and saw her, something in his face hardened just for a second. She tried to speak. Mr. Johnson, not now, he said flatly. You'll speak when I ask you to. She flinched. It was the first time in years someone had shut her down like that, but she knew better than to push back. In the conference room, Principal Paula Grant stood up quickly. Mr. Johnson, I am so sorry about all of this. We're taking the situation very seriously, and I'd like to see my daughter, he said. Now. Of course, she said. She signaled the assistant, who disappeared down the hall. Ava had been sitting alone in the school counselor's office, silent for nearly 20 minutes, her eyes puffy and her shoulders curled inward. When the door opened and she saw her father, she didn't move at first. He stepped in, crouched down in front of her, and placed his hand gently on hers. Are you hurt? He asked. She shook her head no. Did she touch you? She shook her head again. She took my stuff. In front of everyone. She said I looked suspicious. Her voice cracked on the last word. He closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, there was something new behind them. Rage, yes, but buried under layers of something deeper. Memory. I'm here now, he said quietly. You don't need to say anything else. I've got you. He stood, straightened his jacket, and turned to counselor. Thank you. We'll be going to the conference room now. Mr. Johnson. The counselor began, nervous. We haven't. But the look he gave her stopped the words in her throat. They returned to the conference room, Ava walking beside him, her hand in his. Inside, Principal Grant had seated Ms. Whitmore at the long table, along with 2 other faculty members and the school district's legal representative, who had arrived in record time. Marcus did not sit. He remained standing behind his daughter's chair, his voice low, calm, and devastating. I want an explanation. I want it recorded. And I want it now. Ms. Whitmore cleared her throat. There were concerns, security concerns. Ava was acting evasively, and given recent district policies about student belongings, I felt it necessary to confirm there were no dangerous items. What dangerous item did you find? He asked. She hesitated. None. But what training do you have in conducting searches of students? Well, none specifically, but as an educator. Are you law enforcement? No. But did you receive consent from my daughter before taking her belongings? Silence. Did you inform the principal before initiating a search? Still silence. Did you ask any white students to surrender their backpacks today? Her lips parted, but she said nothing. The silence hung heavy. Principal Grant spoke next. Mr. Johnson, we're conducting an internal review of this incident, and of course your daughter's well-being is our top priority. No, he interrupted. Your top priority has been protecting this institution's image. You had a teacher publicly humiliate a black child, strip her dignity in front of her peers, and now you're scrambling. With all due respect, no, Ms. Grant. You don't get to say that today. He looked at Ms. Whitmore again, his voice still low, but sharp enough to draw blood. Do you remember a boy named Marcus Johnson? Skinny, quiet, loved math, sat in the back of the room. 6th grade, 1992. Her face went pale. She blinked. Once. Twice. You accused him of stealing a teacher's wallet, pulled him into the hallway, called him a liar, sent him home with a disciplinary mark that nearly got him suspended, only for the wallet to turn up in the teacher's car the next day. No one in the room moved. Ms. Whitmore opened her mouth, but no sound came out. That was me, Marcus said. I remember your face. I remember the way you looked at me, like I was trash, like I didn't belong. Ava slowly turned to look at her father. This was new. This part of him she had never seen. He hadn't just built Johnson Holdings from the ground up. He had done it with this wound still open. I tried to forget, he continued. Tried to believe that money, power, respect would protect my daughter from the same thing. But here we are. Same school. Same teacher. Same disease. The silence was suffocating. Ms. Whitmore finally found her voice. Mr. Johnson, I had no idea. I never meant. You meant exactly what you did, he said. You just didn't expect the consequences to look like this. Principal Grant stood up, her voice nervous but firm. Mr. Johnson, we are deeply troubled by this revelation. This incident will be thoroughly investigated, and I promise you, it will not be ignored. It's already been seen, he said simply, by the entire city. He turned to Ava. Come on, sweetheart, we're going home. As they walked out, Ava whispered, You went to the school? He nodded. A long time ago. And she did that to you too? She did. Why didn't you ever tell me? He looked down at her, his face unreadable. Because I wanted to believe it was over. I didn't want you to carry what I had to carry. Ava looked ahead as they reached the main doors. Reporters were already gathering near the sidewalk. I think I need to, she said softly. He looked at her then, really looked at her, 12 years old and already so much older than he wanted her to be. Then I'll carry it with you, he said, every step. Outside the cameras flashed. The microphones extended, but Marcus didn't stop. He opened the door for Ava, helped her into the SUV, and closed it gently. As they pulled away, he reached for his phone. Cancel all my meetings, he told his assistant. We're shifting priorities. Yes, sir. What should I tell the board? Tell them my daughter comes first. Behind them, in the quiet halls of Lincoln Ridge, Ms. Whitmore sat in the conference room, staring down at the table, her face blank. But in her mind, the past was no longer buried. It had returned, angrier, louder, and more powerful than ever. And this time, it wasn't going away. The video had reached nearly 300,000 views by the time Marcus Johnson stepped onto the stage at the Denver Civic Auditorium. It had been just 4 days since the incident at Lincoln Ridge, and yet it felt like the entire city had changed shape. Protests outside the school, op-eds in major newspapers, late-night talk show segments. What had started as a cruel moment in a middle school classroom had bloomed into something national. Ava had barely left the house. She spent most of her time in the upstairs study, curled into the armchair her mother had once picked out for the reading corner. She said little, ate less. She hadn't cried again, at least not where anyone could see. But Marcus recognized the look in her eyes, that numb, hollow stare of someone who no longer feels safe. He had worn that same look once. For weeks, he'd tried to shield her from the public noise. The reporters camped outside their gated home, the endless requests for interviews, the growing speculation about what Johnson Holdings would do. But when the Denver Public Education Committee invited him to speak at the emergency equity hearing, he didn't hesitate. This time, he wouldn't be quiet. The auditorium was packed with parents, educators, school board members, students, journalists. Ms. Whitmore was not in attendance. She had been suspended 2 days prior, pending formal investigation, and hadn't been seen since. But her name sat like a shadow on every tongue. When Marcus approached the podium, silence fell. He didn't bring notes. He didn't need them. He stood straight, his eyes sweeping across the room, then landed briefly on Ava, seated in the front row, her fingers folded tightly in her lap. He began slowly. When my daughter was humiliated in front of her classmates last week, it wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a reflection of something deeper, something older. He paused. My name is Marcus Daniel Johnson, CEO of Johnson Holdings, father of Ava Johnson, and former student of Lincoln Ridge Middle School. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Many had speculated, but he had never confirmed it publicly. Until now. In 1992, when I was 11 years old, I sat in the same classrooms my daughter does now. I carried the same kind of silence she does, and I faced the same woman she faced. He took a breath. The memory pulled at his chest like a weight. Ms. Karen Whitmore accused me of stealing a teacher's wallet. No investigation. No questions. Just her word. She called me into the hallway and told me that boys like me always ended up in trouble, that I should get used to being searched. Audible gasps broke through the crowd. Ava stared up at her father, eyes wide. He had never told her this. That moment followed me, he continued. Every time I stepped into a boardroom, every time I applied for a loan, every time someone called me articulate, as if it were a surprise, I'd buried it. I thought if I built enough walls, enough power, I could protect my daughter from ever feeling that. But trauma doesn't stay buried. It passes on, quietly, invisibly, until it explodes. The room was utterly silent. No coughs, no phones, not even a hum of the overhead lights could be heard over his voice. When I saw the video of my daughter clutching her backpack, crying, surrounded by silence and laughter, and a teacher who felt entitled to strip her of her dignity, I didn't just see Ava. I saw myself. 30 years ago, same hallway, same fear. He gripped the edges of the podium. This isn't about one teacher. This is about a system that teaches those teachers they are untouchable. That suspicion is a right when aimed at the right target. That black children must earn their innocence, while others are born into it. A man in the back row stood up, applauding slowly. Then others followed. A wave of clapping grew until nearly the entire auditorium was on its feet. Marcus didn't acknowledge it. He waited, let it fade. I'm not here to ask for an apology, he said as the applause quieted. Apologies don't undo humiliation. I'm here to demand change, not promises, not diversity posters. Real change, training, oversight, a rewriting of what power looks like in our schools. He gestured toward Ava. Our children deserve to walk into a classroom and not brace for impact. They deserve to be seen, and not just when they suffer. Another wave of applause swelled, but this time it was mixed with tears. Some clapped with trembling hands. Others wiped their faces. The superintendent stood from his chair behind the speaker's table. "Mr. Johnson," he said, his voice shaking, "we had no idea." "That's the point," Marcus said. "You never do until it's your child." That night, the speech went viral, not just in Denver, but nationwide. It was replayed on evening news segments, quoted in editorials, discussed in classrooms. For Ava, something shifted after that. She wasn't just a girl who cried in class anymore. She was the daughter of the man who wouldn't stay quiet, and slowly that gave her strength. At home, she and her father sat together at the kitchen table. "You really never told anyone?" she asked him. "Not even Mom?" Marcus shook his head. "I didn't want to bring it into our lives. I thought if I left it in the past, it would stay there. But it didn't." "No," he said quietly. "It didn't." "I wish you had told me," she whispered. "I wouldn't have felt so alone." He reached across the table and took her hand. "You're not alone, Ava. You never were. I just forgot that being silent doesn't make you safe. It just makes you invisible." Later that week, Ava was invited to speak at a student-led forum on racial equity. She stood at the front of the room, wearing a simple black sweater and jeans, her hair pulled into a neat bun. She looked smaller than the others, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. "When Ms. Whitmore took my backpack, she thought she was teaching me a lesson. She was, but not the one she meant. She taught me that no matter how hard you try to fit in, some people will still see you as less. And the only way to survive that is to stop trying to be small, because shrinking won't protect you, but telling the truth might." In the audience, students clapped. Some stood. Teachers watched with solemn expressions. Marcus stood in the back, his arms crossed, his eyes damp. He wasn't used to crying. But today, he let it happen, because his daughter had taken something unbearable and turned it into something bigger than both of them. And he knew, without a doubt, that the cycle had broken, not by forgetting the past, but by facing it head-on, publicly, loudly, together. The weeks that followed the hearing felt like the world had tilted on its axis. For Lincoln Ridge Middle School, nothing was the same. Ms. Whitmore officially resigned under pressure from the school district, though the word resign was a generous label for what had actually happened. In truth, she had been placed on indefinite administrative leave, investigated not only for her treatment of Ava, but for a troubling pattern stretching back over 2 decades. Former students came forward, many of them now adults, some with children of their own, sharing eerily similar stories, the same tone of suspicion, the same public humiliations, the same biased assumptions dressed as discipline. Her file, once hidden behind glowing performance reviews and tenure protections, was now a legal liability. The district scrambled to mitigate the damage. Mandatory anti-bias training was rolled out across all Denver schools. Equity consultants were hired. Curriculum audits began. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even quick. But something had cracked open, and it wasn't going to close again. Meanwhile, the Center for Racial Equity in Education, funded by Marcus Johnson and named in honor of his daughter, broke ground in downtown Denver. The Ava Johnson Center. The sign stood proudly beside construction fencing, white letters on steel, clean and sharp against the winter sky. Ava didn't visit the site right away. She watched the updates from a distance, still adjusting to the weight of her own name now attached to something so public. But inside her, things were shifting. Not suddenly, quietly. At home, the silences between her and Marcus began to change. They weren't as heavy. They no longer sat across from each other at breakfast with the weight of unspoken things between them. They talked more, not always about big issues, sometimes just about school, music, the book she was reading. But even those small things felt like bridges being built. One morning, over oatmeal and black coffee, Marcus looked up from his phone and said, "Do you know what your middle name means?" Ava blinked, surprised. "No, not really." He smiled faintly. "Elaine, it was your grandmother's name. My mother. She was the first in our family to go to college. Graduated in 1968. Spent her whole life teaching kids how to read." Ava stirred her spoon slowly. "You never talk about her. I didn't want to attach you to all that weight, but maybe that was a mistake. Maybe our stories are what give us roots. Ava nodded, quiet. I want to know more. About her. About you. Before all this. Marcus reached across the table and handed her a small envelope. Inside was a photograph. A boy, maybe 11 or 12, skinny and wide-eyed, standing in front of a red brick school building with a backpack that looked far too big for his frame. That's me, he said. First day of 6th grade. Lincoln Ridge. Ava turned the photo over. In faded pencil, the words read, "Make it count, baby. Don't let them shrink you." She looked up. Who wrote that? My mom. His voice caught slightly. She used to say that when I got scared, when I wanted to disappear. Don't let them shrink you. Ava held the photo gently, like it might tear if she pressed too hard. I think I understand now. That afternoon, they drove to Lincoln Ridge. Just the two of them. Ava hadn't been back since the day of the incident. The school looked the same. The rows of lockers, the outdated posters, the long stretch of beige tile. But it didn't feel the same. The fear had faded, replaced by something else, something firmer. As they walked the halls, teachers stepped aside respectfully. Students whispered, not out of mockery but reverence. Ava wasn't the girl with the expensive bag anymore. She was the girl who had stood up and said no. They stopped outside the classroom where it had all happened. The door was closed. Marcus didn't suggest going in. He just stood beside her, silent. She thought I was trying to show off, Ava said softly. But I wasn't. I just liked the bag. It made me feel grown. You don't need to explain that to anyone, Marcus replied. Least of all her. I didn't even want to speak at that forum, Ava said. I was shaking the whole time. You didn't show it. I still hear her voice sometimes, she admitted. The way she said, especially your family, like I didn't belong. Marcus's jaw tensed. But instead of reacting with anger, he looked at her with calm. That's what people like her do. They make you doubt your place. But the truth is, they've always been afraid of what you carry. Your name, your mind, your light. Ava let that sit for a moment. Then she turned and looked up at him. I think I want to go back. To school. I don't want to leave because of her. Marcus looked at his daughter. Steady, resolute, scarred but not broken. Then you will. On your terms. And I want to speak. At the opening of the center. That made him pause. Are you sure? Yeah, she said. This started with me. It should start with me again. That night, Marcus stood at his desk, alone, holding the old photo of himself. He hadn't looked at it in years. He flipped it over and read his mother's faded message again. Don't let them shrink you. He smiled quietly and placed the photo in a new frame, next to a newer one. A picture of Ava, standing at the podium in her forum, eyes bright, voice clear. It was time. Time for the city to hear her again, for her to define herself on her own terms, for a story that started in silence to end in power. The grand opening of the Ava Johnson Center for Racial Equity in Education was held on a crisp Saturday morning in late April. The sky was perfectly blue, streaked within white clouds that moved slowly above downtown Denver. The air carried the scent of fresh-cut wood, steel, and new beginnings. Hundreds gathered outside the towering glass and stone building, its facade sleek but warm, with a wide front plaza designed to host students, educators, and community leaders for generations to come. Along the outer wall, etched in silver lettering, were the words, "Justice begins when silence ends." Ava stood inside the main lobby, watching the crowd through the tinted glass. Her hair was braided into a soft crown, and she wore a simple navy dress and white sneakers. Her choice, not her father's, and not her mother's either. She wanted to feel like herself. Real, honest, nervous energy fluttered in her stomach, but it wasn't the kind of fear that made her want to disappear. It was the kind that told her this moment mattered, that she had something to say, and the world was ready to hear it. Marcus stood beside her, his suit tailored as always, but his expression softer than usual. Proud, yes, but also still, settled in a way he hadn't been for years. Are you ready? He asked gently. She took a breath. Yeah, I am. They walked out together onto the temporary stage built in front of the center's main entrance. The crowd clapped as they approached, but Ava didn't flinch. She stepped up to the microphone, adjusted it slightly, and let the silence settle before speaking. "A few months ago," she began, her voice clear, "I was made to feel small, not just because of a backpack or a name or where I sat in a classroom, but because someone believed I didn't belong. And for a moment, I believed them too." She looked out at the faces before her, students from her school, teachers, organizers, press. Her voice didn't shake. "But the truth is, I do belong. We all do, not because of where we come from or how much money we have, but because this world needs voices like ours, stories like ours, power that isn't quiet or polite or convenient, power that rises from being seen." She glanced at her father briefly. "My dad once told me that silence doesn't protect you. It just makes you invisible. I think he was right. I used to think that staying quiet would help me survive. Now I know that speaking up is how I live." The applause was immediate, loud, long, and not just because she was young or brave or had survived something awful, but because she had taken what was meant to break her and turned it into foundation, brick by brick, truth by truth. Inside the center, exhibits were already open. Interactive displays on racial equity, spaces for student-led projects, resource rooms for teachers to unlearn generations of bias. In the back of the lobby, framed and placed carefully under glass, was Ava's burgundy Telfar backpack, not as a symbol of luxury, but as a reminder that even something as ordinary as a school bag can carry generations of weight, history, expectation, resistance. After the speeches, Marcus and Ava took time to walk to the halls of the new center. People stopped them every few steps, to thank them, to shake their hands, to say how much the story had meant. Some had tears in their eyes. Others just nodded, speechless. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting golden light across the city skyline, father and daughter sat quietly on a bench just outside the center's entrance. "Do you think she watched?" Ava asked. "Ms. Whitmore?" Marcus paused. "Maybe, maybe not. Do you think she regrets it?" He considered that for a moment, then said, "What matters more is that the world saw it, and they chose a different ending." Ava looked up at the sky, her hands in her lap. "I used to think I wanted to forget it happened. Do you still?" "No," she said. "Now I just want to make sure no one else feels that way again." Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that came not from relief, but from respect, not just as a father, but as a man who saw in his daughter something bigger than anything he had ever built. She didn't need protection anymore. She needed room to grow. They sat in silence as the lights of the center turned on behind them, bright and even, cutting clean lines through the glass. The city buzzed on around them. But in that moment, nothing else was louder than the quiet between them. Not empty, but full. Complete.